And that's not to say that uncertainty is a super pleasant experience. It's really challenging. But I encourage you to think about something. With times of uncertainty come infinite possibilities. Hello. Welcome to The Head of the Table. I'm Nora Riddle. I'm your host, and I'm a former policy advisor, former chief of staff in corporate America, and your advisor on all things leadership. I'm so excited to have you here today because we're going to be talking about uncertainty. I live in Washington, D.C., and frankly, there's been a lot of uncertainty in my city, and uncertainty in the U.S., and uncertainty around the globe, and in my life too. If you haven't been following along, in November of 2024 last year, the U.S. had a presidential election, and there was a change in political party. Now, I'm not a political official by any means, but my life has ended up pretty impacted. First and foremost, when there's any change in political party, if you work for any part of the US government, there's changes of policy and changes of procedure and changes of how you say things and how you interact, and there's so much change. And I was only about a year into the job at this point. So I faced a lot of uncertainty with what my job would look like, what my work would look like, if that work would exist, would I still have a job, what was going on. And it was really challenging. And it hasn't really gotten any easier on my end. In about May of this year, I found out that my office was no longer going to be around and my services were not needed. So at the end of July, I officially was let go, as were a lot of people at the State Department. And that was really hard for a couple of reasons. One, I loved the people I worked with. My job paid really well, and I loved the work that I did. Like, I want to do it for free, kind of. I love the work. And that was really challenging. On top of that, I've had a lot of changes in my personal life, and I've started to now launch a business. I'm podcasting for the first time. I'm really putting myself out there on social media. So I've had just a lot of change in my life, which has brought in a lot of uncertainty as a result. Part of that uncertainty really is just my subconscious brain freaking out because of change. We've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before, how sometimes your subconscious brain gets a little freaked out by change. And uncertainty is really your subconscious brain just not being able to predict the future. And I started to think back, like, when was the last time I experienced uncertainty like this? And for me, it was college. I don't know about you, but when I graduated high school and college, I sort of had an idea of what was next. I knew I would have a job, or I knew I was going to university, but I didn't fully know what that looked like. And especially graduating from college, I had no job lined up. And I mean, no job. I did 5 internships in college. I worked part-time. I did extracurriculars. I had good grades. I learned Mandarin, for goodness sake. And I still had no job. It was terrifying. And I remember in the months that came to follow, I decided to pursue graduate school because at least that was something that I could do next. And I was really, really fortunate. I got into some really good graduate school programs. And the one I was set to go to was really affordable and a really solid program. And then something amazing happened. 2 weeks before I was supposed to go to graduate school, I got an email. I had gotten my dream job. So I've talked a little bit about this before on the podcast, how I worked for the U.S. mission to the UN straight out of school after doing an internship with them. Well, it turns out that they had wanted me back 2 weeks before graduate school. Oh, what do I do? So thankfully, I had some really understanding people at the admissions office, and I was able to take that job opportunity instead of pursuing graduate school. And it was amazing. It was my first time experiencing negotiations at the UN before on my own, which was again really terrifying, but a great opportunity. I was able to go to Security Council negotiations, Security Council meetings. I was able to network with a variety of different delegates from across the world, which was such great exposure. And I had amazing mentors. But I think back now, and if I hadn't had that time in between graduating from undergraduate and receiving that job opportunity, I wouldn't have been able to take it. If I had had a job lined up perfectly, I would have had to turn down my dream job opportunity. So as we're going through these times of uncertainty, whether you're impacted by a recession, impacted by shifts in politics, or just impacted by changes in your life, I want you to think back to a time that you faced uncertainty, that you felt like you had no idea what was next, you didn't know what to do about it, and I want you to think about how that unfolded. Did it all work out? I bet it did. And that's not to say that uncertainty is a super pleasant experience. It's really challenging. But I encourage you to think about something. With times of uncertainty come infinite possibilities. And the reason uncertainty feels so scary is just because your subconscious brain can't predict what's next. And so it's coming up with all of these doomsday scenarios, but that doesn't really mean that's going to happen. When I didn't know if I was going to have a job out of undergrad, I thought, oh my God, I must be such a failure. I don't have a job. I put in all this effort. I've tried so hard and I still don't have a job. But it was because if I had had that job, I wouldn't have been open to a dream opportunity that I didn't even know was coming in. I remember when I was a chief of staff in corporate America that I did not have my next project figured out. When I was a chief of staff, I kind of did that for about a year and a half. And the way it worked at my company was that I was on project work, and then I did a chief of staff with some project work, and then ultimately I was moving forward. And I had found the most amazing person to replace me. I really hope she's listening to this podcast, because to this day, I still think she's absolutely amazing. Love you so much. And I had to have a project picked out so that I could kind of move on out of the chief of staff position. And oh my gosh, I had the perfect project land in my lap. It leveraged my human rights skill set. It leveraged my kind of knowledge of defense. It leveraged kind of my expertise and ability to manage others. And I was so excited. The stars were aligning. We had picked the perfect replacement for chief of staff. Everything was going amazing. And the funding got cut. And was it just brutal. And during that time, I kind of tried to find several different positions. And it was really, really challenging because a lot of people, are looking to get promoted. I wasn't the only person hoping to kind of step up into a managerial position. And the human rights field is so amazing. I absolutely, my heart goes out to everyone who works in that field. I know that's another field that's really facing a lot of challenges right now, which is really, really unfortunate because it's super important work. But let me tell you, trying to get the conversion of human rights and getting clients to want to pay for that work can be kind of tricky. Either there kind of needs to be a need from the government, or there needs to be a drive from the private sector saying that we value this work. And that's not to say the work is not inherently valuable. It just depends on the market and the needs at the time. And unfortunately, at the time, that need was kind of disappearing, or at least was lacking funding. And so I started to look for other projects, and I just kept hitting a brick wall after a brick wall. Talked to people, they really wanted to have me on projects, they really wanted to help me out, but they just didn't quite have the right fit. And I went on like that for about 6 months. And I really, really appreciate the leadership on that kind of original project that I was doing at the same time that I was a chief of staff. You know, they helped me stay on. They gave me a lot of work to do. They really did try to put like as much energy into me as they really could, but it ultimately just kind of didn't work out. But it was because I got my job as a policy advisor. And once again, I think back to that moment where if things hadn't worked out, if I had really sat in my chief of staff position and tried to put on a mask that everything was fine, that I had everything figured out, that I didn't need help finding a project, that, you know, maybe I could just shrink myself and I didn't have to step into a manager position, I would have accepted some other project and I wouldn't have been able to say yes to that opportunity to become an economic policy advisor. There's one other thing I really want to talk about with uncertainty, and it's something that I've been experiencing a lot right now. And this is particularly for my leaders or for anyone who feels like they have to have it together at all times. As I started this podcast and I started my business last week, exciting, go check it out. It's noravittlecoaching.com. I'll link it in the show notes, but it should also appear on the screen. I really felt like I had to have a mask on. And that's not why I started this podcast. I started the Head of the Table to have open and honest conversations about leadership or pursuing leadership opportunities. And that's not fair to you. And that's not fair to me either. At the end of the day, leadership is about being your authentic self and really stepping into that power. And I was really challenged to do that because while faced with all of this uncertainty, I felt like to coach people, to advise people on leadership, that I needed to have it figured out, which is not really the key to life if you think about it. If you think about it, every moment in life is uncertain, is about change. The only thing consistent in life is that we're continually evolving. And so I encourage you as a leader, when you have those moments where you're like, I got to put the mask on, I got to feel like I have it together, I encourage you to, one, think about why you're doing that. Is that for you? Is that for your ego? Is that because you feel like you're supposed to be doing it? And then I would encourage you to think about, what would you do if you were really stepping into your authenticity? If you were just showing up as yourself? At the end of the day, as a leader, people are more likely to believe in you if you're showing up and you're saying, I'm also struggling with these things. If you're showing up and you're showing compassion, if you're showing sympathy and empathy for the challenges going on around you. You're a leader right now where you're really challenged because you don't have the ability to give as many promotions or bonuses or awards, or you don't have the opportunity to hire more people, or you're even having to let go people because of the economic situation wherever you are, I encourage you to really show up as your authentic self and highlight that you are facing these challenges and that you recognize that it is really hard right now and that people are suffering as a result of challenges, of uncertainty, of change. Because when you show up as your authentic self, you never know what connections you're going to make. A big reason that I was selected as a chief of staff is that I had an ability to show up authentically, because I was able to have open and honest conversations with leaders. I was able to sit down in front of my project, which at the time had around 35 people, but I think got up to maybe 70, 75 people by the time that I left, and have honest conversations, talk about promotion cycles, talk about the challenges of a hybrid work environment, talk about how our company structured promotions, receiving awards and bonuses, kind of create some transparency so that a lot of people could get understanding. And I was able to take that from one project and bring it to a whole section of the firm. And I think the reason that it went so well is because a lot of people are afraid to ask those authentic questions. I'm not encouraging you to go ask questions that are very blunt or are harsh or mean. I'm encouraging you to ask questions from a place of curiosity. And that's how I received that opportunity to step into leadership. So please, please, as a leader, show up authentically. It might be scary. It might be challenging. You might be putting yourself in front of a camera, putting yourself in front of a lot of people, and opening yourself up to rejection, to anger or frustration, to not being accepted. But I really, really think at the end of the day, when you show up as an authentic leader, people know that and they're going to respond. So to summarize today's episode, if you're struggling with uncertainty like I am, don't forget that with uncertainty comes infinite possibility. There are plenty of times in your life that you've faced uncertainty and amazing things have come out of it. And don't forget to keep showing up as your authentic self. Whether you're an aspiring leader or current leader, you can never go wrong with showing up as yourself. Now, if you're curious about the Head of the Table, please go check out our Instagram account, our TikTok. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. It's at the Head of the Table podcast. And if you're curious about my coaching services, I'm offering 30-minute free consultations to just kind of get a feel for my coaching style and also talk through some things that you're going through. If you're facing uncertainty, let's deal with it together.